one of the benefits nature gives us is, fresh water, food, and I think that's a very important value. In this session, we're going to focus on nature-based solutions, and I think with many of the sessions, we have a tendency to start with a panel and then right at the end, when we're kind of closing up and there's limited time, we go to the audience. But I think you as an audience have tremendous knowledge. So I want to start with the audience and then I'll introduce the program to you, and I would be happy to hear from you, what is a nature-based solution to you? Because there is a definition that was adopted at UNEP in 2022. There is an IUCN standard on how to develop an MBS, but what is an MBS to you? Because I think these definitions tend to be a bit rigid. So I'm happy to hear from anyone in the audience, and if you feel inclined to add, please raise your hand. What is a nature-based solution to you? Anyone wants to kick us off? It's always a bit scary, so I'll just go to Gaston because he always has an answer.
So nature-based solutions are like the aspects that we introduce into projects that we are implementing that rely on nature to be able to meet some societal needs, for example.
Excellent, Gaston. I think in particular that last component is very important. So it's using nature, but it's using nature to help us as humans fix the problems that we face. So it's not nature doing stuff for nature, but it's actually nature doing stuff for us. Anyone else wants to add or contribute to that, or has other suggestions on what they consider a nature-based solution? Or maybe you have a different definition you use within your organization. We see other wording coming up, such as bioeconomy, and what I see is that there's a strong interrelation between the different ways of presenting this work. So anyone else who wants to add on what does a nature-based solution mean to you, and there's no wrong answers here. Okay, I think you're all digesting your food, so I'll go to the front. But keep in mind that this is an interactive session in which we invite you all to contribute. And with that said, I want to invite my amazing panelists to the front. So firstly, I still can't pronounce your name after seeing you for weeks at COP16, but Chiyedza Heri, who is the CEO of the Ubuntu Alliance. We have Hassan Aftab Sheikh from the University of Oxford. Noleen Moyo, the head of sustainability at ZimRe Holdings, and then also Henda Sebai, who is the director for risk management at Tunis. And as Henda will be speaking in French, Gaston, who is always willing to give everyone a hand on whatever issue they need support with, will join us on stage as well. So, nature-based solutions are solutions to the crisis we face today in the area of nature, in the area of climate, but also, for example, in the area of pollution. They help us people handle that crisis, but what we see is that investment in nature-based solutions is often small and it's not always scaling, and that's a shame because, as many of us know, nature-based solutions can provide efficient solutions to challenges, such as about 1/3 of the opportunities for climate. And Africa, being such a vast continent, has so much space for nature-based solutions. So when you think about that, it's, for example, building a mangrove forest, as is happening in, for example, Kenya or Mozambique, instead of having a grey seawall. And this mangrove forest, beyond being a flood protection, can also provide you with lots of other benefits. It's a breeding ground for fish, for example. So I think that's what we mean when we speak about nature-based solutions Today, when we see nature-based solutions, only about 17% comes from private funding, and there is an estimated $700 billion annual global biodiversity funding gap, but also big numbers in the climate space. So what we'll do in this session is showcase innovative financial mechanisms, investment-ready projects, but most importantly, I love partnerships. We'll look for partnerships to leverage that. So I have a few questions prepared for my wonderful panelists, and then we'll be turning to you, our audience, to add to that as well. And I want to start with hopefully an easy question for all of you, and I think I might start with Henda in the back for this question. But what was the moment or experience that first sparked your interest in working within nature-based solutions, or more broadly, aligning finance with nature?
Alors, je vous remercie tout d'abord pour l'invitation et je suis très ravie de participer, de prendre part à cette table ronde qui discute d'une thématique très intéressante et cruciale pour toute l'humanité, y compris pour toutes les institutions financières. Là, j'évoque par rapport aux solutions fondées sur la nature, j'évoque ma sœur qui est ingénieure en environnement, qui travaille à l'Agence nationale de protection de l'environnement et qui est spécialiste dans l'eau. Donc d'habitude, toutes les sœurs, lorsqu'elles se rencontrent, elles parlent d'affaires familiales et tout, mais là, entre moi et ma sœur, on parle que des conventions ratifiées par la Tunisie pour la protection de l'environnement, notamment les conventions Ramsar pour les zones humides au nord de la Tunisie, les conventions aussi pour la transition vers le zéro carbone. On parle de tout ce qui est thématique et elle m'intéresse tout le temps pour tout ce qui est protection de l'environnement, tout ce qui est faire face aux risques climatiques et tout. Surtout, j'ajoute à cela que la Tunisie fait face ces dernières années à des risques croissants liés au changement climatique, notamment tout ce qui est vulnérabilité face à l'inondation, face aussi à tout ce qui est rareté de l'eau. La Tunisie est un pays qui a un risque de stress hydrique important. Donc tout ça fait que tout ce qui a trait de l'environnement, notamment les risques et la manière de gérer et de réduire ces risques-là, notamment sans pour les nommer, donc notamment de parler de solutions basées sur la nature. Et j'évoque que dernièrement, on a abordé un mécanisme qu'on fait en Tunisie, on fait beaucoup dans les régions rurales, et qui a l'objectif de retenir l'eau pluviale et pour faire face à la rareté de l'eau dans certaines régions rurales. Donc cette solution-là, elle a été même adoptée par l'État tunisien qui a, dans la loi de finances de 2025, il a adopté une loi pour le financement de ces mécanismes-là. Donc ça, c'est parmi les discussions que je fais avec ma sœur, que je salue. Merci.
So Henda started by expressing her gratitude for being invited to discuss a very topical issue, one that is critical to organizations and to governments. She went further to say, I mean, contrary to the relationship we have as siblings, where when we meet, we talk about family issues, her relationship with her sister, who works at the National Environment Protection Agency in Tunisia, is very special, because when they meet, their conversations all center around the international framework that the governments have signed up to, and the progress that needs to be done, and the efforts that needs to be done as well. And this is because Tunisia is very vulnerable to climate shocks, especially water scarcity related topics. Which is why she's saying, all conversations around risk assessment, mitigation, and all projects in this light are of interest to her and are critical. And she ends up by saying there was a project they initiated which is now being adopted by the government of Tunisia on efficient water use, given the country's vulnerability to climate change and water scarcity.
Wonderful, that's great. I always like to kick off with a personal question because it gives you so much more depth and insight. Noleen, can you speak a little bit about your experience?
Sure, thank you so much and good afternoon everyone. I think my passion stems from two things, and the first is data and analytics, but the second is I think having two very young children and seeing where the world is and the way the world is going and all these climate shocks that we're experiencing. So that also landed me into sustainability because it's also trying to push a better future for my children, because if we don't do it, who else will? So it's then trying to marry those two passions together, which is sustainability and a better world, but also trying to have data make sense for a lot of people for that, because I think it's also still a buzzword, particularly in Africa or Southern Africa or the country that I come from. So making it make sense for a lot of people.
Excellent, thank you. Hassan, I think you need to share the microphone.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. For me, my interest in nature started while I was doing my PhD in air pollution. So how I came across nature finance, so now I work on nature finance, is I was reading about the Kunming-Montreal Protocol, which happened in December 2022, and then there was like an uproar of, okay, we need to finance nature, and how do we do it? Nature is under a lot of risk, but these conversations are not new, considering how we've been harming our environment for the past 2 decades. Past many decades, but it's been accelerated in the past 2 decades more than it was before. So yeah, I mean, I kind of came across that, I got more and more interested in it, and then I currently working as a fellow in nature finance, and yeah, that's me.
Wonderful, and then we'll continue with Chiyedza with this question, how did you enter this field?
So my background is not even related. My undergraduate is in biomedical science, and I got interested and involved in nature where, from biomedical science, I was looking at it and we have more people dying from non-communicable diseases, and it's all linked to the environment and the food we eat. And now, being a farmer's daughter, I've literally grown up in the agricultural sector and seen the trends over the years where, when I was younger back in the 90s, farmers would have, out of 5 years, they would have 2 really good years, 2 really bad years, and maybe 1 year, and it would balance each other out. And progressively, we're seeing worse and worse trends. So in 2021, random fact, Zimbabwe is the second largest exporter of sugar snap and Monch 2 peas in the world after Guatemala. So my parents are pea farmers and they export to the EU. And that year I was working for our apex body for horticultural exports, and we had a very interesting season where it wasn't a drought year and our exports dropped by 40%. And engaged with our export development agency, and across the country the yields had drastically declined, and this was due to mid-season rain, milder winter, increased disease pressure. And when you look at the fact that to be a horticultural export farmer, these are your creme de la creme of farmers, seeing a 40% reduction in your revenue, your earnings, your output, it makes you think, what is the impact to the smallholder farmer? Then thought it was maybe just localized within the Zimbabwean context, and farmers have networks. So I was able to call up the Kenya Fresh Produce, the FPIC, which is the Fresh Produce Exporters Association of Kenya. They had also seen yield decreases. I engaged with some of the farmers in England. They had seen decreases in yields, but mainly due to loss in pollinators. That's when it really the penny dropped that we are reaching a point where we have a growing population, we have increasing land use pressure, and our food production capacity is declining. So that's what got me interested in nature.
Beautiful, thank you so much. And I'll be staying with you for the next question. So I think your example described very well the challenges that we're facing. But nature-based solutions can provide, it's in its name itself, can provide solutions, right, for Africa and the Middle East. So why do you think this is a critical opportunity, particularly in this region, not only from an environmental standpoint, but also very much from an economic standpoint?
So there was an interesting paper published earlier this year looking at nature-based solutions for economic recovery. And I think post-COVID, a lot of countries and economies are struggling, and a lot of African countries are agribusiness based. So when you look at nature-based solutions, and I've got a photo for you to share. Remember I shared with you my story that we had yield decreases 2021. Last year, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, we experienced one of the worst droughts in 40 years. And I'm going to ask for a picture to just be shown up to show you the level of devastation, where we had areas experiencing up to 70% crop failure. And when we talk about investing in adaptation, mitigation it's exciting. We want to invest in renewable energy, but when you look at it, you still need people to eat, because how are they going to enjoy the fancy renewable energy powered housing developments if they have no food? So I'll show you another picture there, where as part of a carbon project in Zimbabwe, this is a few kilometers away from the first picture, in Hurungwe, which is one of our drier regions in the country. This was during a drought year. And this is the result of 10 years investing in regenerative agricultural practices. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, people always forget it's not just about nature. People are at the core of nature, and if you put people at the center of any solution, you have long-term outputs. So just from the business and economic resilience, investing in nature-based solutions, such as the example above, where carbon financing was used to finance a transition, we have a tangible example of these farmers still experienced a yield decrease, but in comparison to 70% crop failure rate, they have now a different challenge to face. They now need post-harvest solutions. And when you look at nature-based solutions, it can actually drive, you're moving beyond the basic survival. And if you produce an excess year on year as a farmer, and you now diversify your income through value addition, you can now actually leverage off of nature-based solutions to drive rural economic development. And it's not just limited to agri-food systems. Nature-based solutions can be embedded and integrated in infrastructure. You can have nature-positive roads that use less water, which also results in less financial investment. But I think the exciting thing for Africa is we can build with a sustainability lens. We can leapfrog and learn from more developed, advanced economies that have to retrofit, and it's cheaper for us to, but we can build with generations in mind. Thank you.
Excellent. So you're turning a disadvantage into an advantage, actually. And I love the very practical example, but I think one of the issues we've often seen, and I'll come to the other panelists with a question soon, I won't be staying here forever, in how do you scale this up in size that it's interesting for a financial institution to invest in?
So I think the more we share the positive examples of financial innovations, Africa, we understand our local country context. So engaging with each other and taking positive examples of this. This is an example of 10 years, and in all of the financing that funded the borehole drilling, the solar-powered irrigation, and I think a step taking it further, I'm not saying we should just go drill boreholes. You can, again, integrate nature-based solutions to be replenishing your aquifers, but from a financial perspective, who would you rather bank? the business as usual scenario where we saw a 70% crop failure rate, or would you rather invest in the resilient investing in regenerative practices where you know even if there is a drought, you will have that added level of. So investing in nature-based solutions is also investing in a climate-resilient future.
Wonderful. I think this is one to remember and a fantastic quote. I want to move to you, Hassan, and I'm very happy that we have a representative from university. I was in Paris for the Sustainable Investor Forum last week, and in his opening statement, Eric Usher, our head, spoke about the importance of facts, in particular in these area where there is political turmoil. So I'm very happy to turn to you with my next question. Your research spans nature finance, climate risk, and pollution with a focus on financing nature recovery. Given your experience, how do you see the integration of climate risk and nature-based solutions in the broader financial sector? And then specifically, what role do you think financial institutions can play in addressing the double challenge of nature loss and climate change with a focus on the African and Middle Eastern region? So it's quite a mouthful.
Thank you. So yeah, my just fellow panelists actually, gave me a good foundation to talk on climate resilience and I'll start from there. If people are familiar with the Article 2.1 of the Paris Agreement, which states that we need to flow our finances in a way which is in congruence with lowering greenhouse gas emissions and building a climate resilient economy. So the reason I'm mentioning this article is that there is an inherent problem with how we have this in the Paris Agreement, because we're seeing climate resilience as an outcome and not as a process, and how we need to basically move away from that and include resilience in the entire process and how we finance things. And this is something which my fellow panelists already touched upon, on how the financing needs to embody not just the climate resilience but also resilience for nature. And in terms of how what's happening out there is that there's a big financing gap, as you would all know. There's a UNEP report from 2021 or 2022 highlighting how we need $300 billion US dollars every year. Then there's another report from State of Finance, State of Nature, and which lists around $700 billion of financing needs. But the question here stands that how do we fill this gap? Do we actually need to keep pouring money in? If yes, how do we bring private financiers in? And if not, how are we actually basically making sure that the nature does not degrade? In terms of how there are lots of subsidies that we give to the fossil fuel industry, which is not just impacting your climate, but of course there are impacts which goes beyond your temperatures. You have drivers of nature laws which are impacting your biodiversity, your land use change. All of these drivers are impacting livelihoods. They're impacting the ecosystem services that come from these. So in the context of bringing private financiers in, if you have a degraded piece of land, that actually increases the risk for a private financier to come in, and then you're stuck in this vicious cycle, right? So for in a case like Africa, there are lots of options, and there is some movement that we're seeing in terms of, if you guys have heard about the Transboundary Fund, which was just launched, I think, last year or earlier this year. And that looks beyond just your geographical boundaries, driven, demarked by different countries, and it looks into, there's a case in Southern Africa where 5 countries, including Zimbabwe actually, and Namibia, etc., they're looking into how we can go beyond our borders and look into how we can have habitat connectivity just beyond the geographical boundaries. Because for nature to survive, for nature to recover, we need to have cross-boundary collaboration. So I think there's a lot in terms of, I can talk more on risk perception, but maybe that's something for later.
Thank you so much, Hassan, and also thank you for highlighting. So if you look at indeed the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, there are two different targets. One that speaks about reducing the bad, which is estimated at $500 billion annually, and then it's increasing the good, estimated at $200 billion. And I think we don't have the luxury of time. We need to focus on those two topics together to create more coherence. I would be interested to hear from you. You're here now at an event with a predominantly financial sector audience. How is your university working together with financial sector players to advance their knowledge and understanding?
Sure. In terms of financial institutions, I mean, we need to first focus on what role each financial institution can play. I can see we have some reinsurance representatives from insurance industry. Then you have the pension funds, and you have asset managers, you have commercial banks, you have development banks. So each financial institution has a very different role to play. I mean, there are examples of catalytic funding facilities that are being set up. There is historical evidence from the climate space that what has worked and what hasn't worked. In terms of us, in terms of working on research, and we are trying to see what the barriers for bringing in private finances, because there's a lot of conversation that we need to move away. We need to bring in private finance, but how can we leverage public finance in that context? And in that, there's a big conversation on pension funds. So the UK, for example, it has a very big pension fund, but then you are stuck with this problem of having nature, of keeping nature as a collateral, one. Second, also the problem of nature being an illiquid asset, right? So you have these forests or any wetlands or any other nature project that goes on for 30, 40 years, and you have these private investors or financial institutions coming from these asset managers. They don't currently really see nature as an asset. So the conversation is, do we actually, one, that I don't want to be here and actually be a proponent of commodifying nature, but what I want to clarify is that there are steps being taken on how we can better value nature in contexts of insurance industry, for example. And there's a lot to learn from the insurance industry, as in the insurance industry can feed a lot into the risk perception part of it. And if we are able to better manage risk or better perceive risk of what the risk is in financing a nature project, we might be able to attract more finance in that context without burdening the public sector.
Yeah, and you also see it in payouts due to natural disasters, right? I don't have the numbers here in front of me, but it includes many, many zeros. So it's definitely an opportunity when looking to the insurance sector. I want to turn to you, Noleen, and I think I've been reading through your bio, and it's very impressive. Your work captures financial modeling, risk analysis, data-driven decision-making positions, and integrating ESG principles into ZimRe holding. You spoke about it in your introductory remarks already, but as someone leading the charge on sustainability within this financial sector, how do you see the role of data and analytics in driving investments into nature-based solutions so we can quantify those numbers, and how do you think this can help scale up financing nature-based solutions and alignment with global goals?
Thank you for that. I think what the financial sector also has to realize is that nature-based solutions are actually critical pathways to address both climate climate issues and also development goals that we may have. And I believe that the financial sector is a big catalyst in unlocking investment or innovation and resilience through nature. And I think there's active consideration at various levels, whether it's different forums or I think at different levels as well, from government to private institutions and on the ground, as to how we can increasingly channel capital towards green assets or green development. And I think for example, if you're looking at financing sustainable housing or sustainable commercial hubs and projects that actually protect your natural habitats, and these conversations continue to happen, but I think what is missing is the link between having these just staying as conversations and actually making an impact. And I think this is where data becomes an enabler or accelerates how organizations can move from just talking about it to actually making an impact. And I think this also comes to investing in systems, particularly I think for Africa or the southern region where I come from and my organizations primarily operate in. And this is investing in different systems that can help us actually quantify, and not only quantify, but to help us identify, price, and also ultimately fund high impact nature solutions. Because I think investors will be looking to see a return on any project that they invest in, and I think the missing gap is how to actually show investors where the return will come from. And I think like my colleagues mentioned before, that's the gap that's missing to channel that capital to actual investments for nature. And I think one of the challenges that we face as the southern region is particularly data fragmentation, and that's not only internal within each country, but I think it's across the region, whereas we're all facing the same climate shocks, and we could be having solutions that we can better help each other, and how to actually come with solutions that help our regions specifically. And I think, like I mentioned before, one of the biggest things investors look at is return, and we must redefine what return probably means to us, because in the long term, our ecosystems rely on what we're doing now in order for us to be able to realize that return in the future. And so the finance sector also needs to find tools that internalize nature as an asset class, and not just to look at it as its nature, but to also find how that can trickle down to our bottom lines. So I think ultimately data, and riding from what my colleagues have mentioned, data is what can help us actually communicate that to investors and channel this capital to actual nature projects that can better our futures.
Yeah, I think it's a very rich answer, and I think data helps speaking a language that financial institutions can understand and apply within their own organizations. I loved what you said about our expectation on, what is the return, and also on the availability of data. I know within our own organization we participated or helped many of our members participate in TNFD pilots, and there we, for example, saw that water data in different cities might be captured in a different way, so you need much more alignment between that. But unfortunately, a lot of nature data that is currently available is more qualitative than quantitative. So I think that is still a challenge. It's always the number one question we're asked, when speaking about nature. It's like, give us the greenhouse gas equivalent for nature, and then we say, well, there isn't any, and then it's like, why not? Well, nature is multifaceted. I wouldn't say, people tend to say complex, but I think multifaceted is a better way of speaking about that. After your excellent contribution, Henda, I'll be continuing with you again. I think Hassan referenced to the role of reinsurance already, particularly in catastrophe risk modeling. Sorry, my English is hampering me a little bit. What role do you think the reinsurance sector can play in driving investment into nature-based solutions, and how can these solutions be integrated in traditional risk models within your organization to improve resilience and financial sustainability? And Hassan, if you want to contribute to this question later as well, but let's go to Henda first.
Alors, merci pour la question. Juste au départ, j'aimerais bien dire un mot sur Tunis Re. Tunis Re, c'est le réassureur national tunisien et qui opère sur plusieurs marchés, entre autres bien sûr le marché domestique, l'Afrique et le Moyen-Orient et l'Asie. Bien sûr, en tant que réassureur, son métier c'est de gérer les risques, qu'ils soient risques industriels, risques aux incendies, tout ce qui a trait aux incidents qui peuvent survenir, aux sinistres qui peuvent survenir, mais également il est impliqué dans tout ce qui est gestion de risques de catastrophes naturelles. Et là, je mentionne l'inondation qui ont survenu en Tunisie en 2018, qui ont touché le nord-est de la Tunisie et qui ont coûté aux alentours de 9 millions, je pense, de dollars en total. Et la part de Tunis Re, c'est pour cette inondation-là, c'est de environ 3 millions de dollars. Donc là, je dis que les solutions fondées sur la nature, là, elles deviennent de plus en plus reconnues comme étant un élément crucial dans les stratégies de gestion des risques au sein des entreprises de réassurance, notamment pour les risques liés au CatNat et à la biodiversité. Et là, j'évoque principalement la possibilité que les solutions basées les SFM apportent pour les réassureurs, notamment en termes de réduction des risques physiques. Donc là, ils interviennent directement en termes de réduction d'impact et de réduction de sévérité. Si on parle par exemple de restauration de zones humides pour le cas tunisien, la reforestation, la végétalisation urbaine, tout ceci peut répondre en même temps à la protection des écosystèmes et à la protection envers les risques, par exemple, d'inondation. Et là, j'évoque particulièrement le cas de la Tunisie, auquel elle a commencé depuis quelques années avec le concours de la Banque mondiale et d'autres bailleurs de fonds. C'est la mise en place d'un programme de résilience, RESCAT, programme de résilience contre les catastrophes. Et là, ce programme-là, il est réparti sur 4 piliers. Le pilier 1, c'est la réduction des risques d'inondation. Et le pilier 2, c'est tout ce qui est protection contre protection. Là, j'aimerais nommer exactement le nom du pilier. Là, je l'ai pas. Oui, mais le pilier 1, c'est la réduction des risques. Le deuxième, c'est la protection des villes. Le troisième, c'est le financement des risques de catastrophe et auquel Tunis Re participe. Et moi-même, je fais partie du comité technique de modélisation des risques catastrophes naturelles. Et le dernier pilier, c'est la coordination entre les différentes parties prenantes et la réglementation. Donc là, la note de synthèse émise par la Banque mondiale qui vient d'être publiée au fin février 2025, c'est la recommandation de la Banque mondiale pour introduire les solutions fondées sur la nature dans le pilier 1 du programme national. Vu l'importance que ces solutions-là peuvent apporter à la protection des écosystèmes tunisiens et notamment la protection des principales villes qui sont exposées au risque d'inondation.
So she started by introducing the organization for which she works, which is ZimRe. It's the national reinsurer for Tunisia, with activities across Africa and Middle East. And as a reinsurer, it's their responsibility or their role to reinsure all sorts of risks, including natural catastrophes. She moved on by citing the example of a flood that happened recently in a part of Tunisia, where the total cost of the flood was sort of like $29 million, and the portion, the payout from ZimRe was $3 million. This is to show the commitment and the engagement in this type of solutions. And she's mentioning that some of the solutions that have been explored in the country and which they've been working include solutions to reduce physical risk, like restoration, reforestation, and urban greening, which contribute to the protection and safeguarding of biodiversity. And she proceeded by citing the example of a World Bank project on resilience that is being implemented in Tunisia with the following pillars. The first one is the reduction of flood risk, the second one is the protection of life, the third being the financing of catastrophe risks, and the fourth being stakeholders coordination. One of the key recommendations from the World Bank report that came out as part of this project is that the government of Tunisia needs to embed nature-based solutions in its national resilience plan.
Wonderful. You make me wish I paid better attention during the French lessons I had in high school. Wonderful. Do you want to add here, Hassan, on the risk modeling component in your work?
Just a couple of words on, not on modeling, but how there are two sides of risk in nature-based solutions or nature. One is if we look into it from how insurance companies currently financially model risk, which you can say has an economic value attached to nature, and the other is the inherent value, which is quite relational. You can call it biodiversity insurance, or you can name it ecosystem insurance. And what needs to be done more and more is to kind of see this inherent value without just looking into the economic value of risk aversion you get from nature-based solution interventions, or from how, when we look into the willingness to pay of people from the ecosystem services provided by these nature-based solutions beyond just climate resilience. So again, this is probably more of a case for insurance industry in terms of their underwriting processes and investment strategies, that if they do want to stay in business, I mean, there might be floods later on which might make them go out of business if they're not quantifying the risk premium accurately.
Thank you so much, Hassan. And on the insurance side, we had a wonderful session yesterday about the nature positive insurance working group, and we're continuing soon also with another insurance session in this room. I have one more question to the panelists, and then I'll be turning to you. And I actually want to start with you, Noleen, because I think you spoke about this already a little bit in your contributions. So from your perspective, how can financial institutions balance short-term financial considerations with long-term sustainability goals when it comes to investing into nature-based solutions? And if you have a question for the audience after this round, I'll be turning to you.
I think this is when probably collaboration comes into play. And I think there's a lot of talk of public-private partnerships, and I'll give an example of one of those partnerships between the insurance industry back home and our government, where they introduced what we call prescribed assets. And those are assets that primarily the government backs, and you have most of your greenhouse assets or projects that primarily speak to your green projects, like your renewable energy as well as sustainable projects. So these give an incentive to your insurers to actually have those assets on their balance sheet, because the way it's been structured is that it gives a better outlook on their balance sheet. So I think that gives more of it's a short-term need that's been covered, but then it also has long-term value because it's driving the insurance industry to actually invest in nature-based assets. So I think public-private partnerships and collaboration between your government and the private sector actually does promote how we can actually solve some of these problems.
Wonderful. Any responses from the other speakers on the same question? Shadia, maybe you have a contribution here? On collaboration, but also how to balance short-term versus long-term.
So I think on the collaboration front, when you look at before we had the global biodiversity framework that was signed in Montreal, we had the Aichi targets. And not a single country around the world achieved that. Like, collectively as humanity, we got an ungraded. If it was an exam, we all failed. So I think looking at, and as a lot of countries are coming up with their national adaptation plans and their national biodiversity strategy and action plans, we really need to take a moment to reflect and say, how did we get it so wrong with the Aichi targets, and what can we do to do better? And I think we are seeing that, when you are pushing for a whole of government, whole of society approach, because climate issues, biodiversity issues, they cut across every single sector of the economy and every single stratosphere of society. So there is a need to collaborate. And not all of the answers are sitting with the finance sector or the agriculture sector or the built environment. We need to be leveraging off of each other's knowledge, and it's going to be more efficient for me to just leverage off of your institutional knowledge, my institutional knowledge, and move forward. We need to move fast and far, and that comes with collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a beautiful answer. I think one of the Archie targets was partially achieved, and I'm getting up because I think we're getting into the final moments of this session. We try to start off more interactive, asking you what is a nature-based solution in your own words, and we had a beautiful panel, but I'd love to hear from you if you have a question for our panelists, because I think that's much more interesting than listening to me asking all the questions. So if anyone has a question for the panelists on one of the topics we've been discussing, please raise your hand. I think we're a bit shy and maybe not so used to asking questions, so I'll just go.
You could also write your questions on a piece of paper in front of you on the table, and we can collect them as well if you would like.
There you go, there you go. Very brave gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Tommy Monday, work with Waikari Insurance. So my question is to the panelists in the underwriting sector. Now, in terms of your underwriting portfolio, both in the core underwriting and the claims management, okay, especially in claims, okay, what are the initiatives that you deploy, okay, to ensure that the claims solution, okay, or the underwriting projects you are insuring are nature-based? Simple question, right?
Okay, let's go to the panelists for this question. So how do you ensure that nature is part of your underwriting and claims, I think it's a question maybe for you, Noleen and Henda.
I think it's, I our underwriting has had to evolve, and it's also had to become a lot more client-based, and we need to have more engagements, because I think we're realizing that it's not just paper-based or black and white anymore. So for you to actually know that it's nature-based, we actually need to change our practices, and we've had to have a lot more engagements with our clients, and to also, I'm not sure if it's due diligence, but to also then see where our clients are in terms of how their business is also becoming more nature-based. So I think it's a lot more maybe engagement and communication with clients, and that's also trying to drive a narrative that we need to all move together with the voice that we're trying to be more nature-based than just staying where sustainability is not something we're talking about more, and trying to embed within our businesses. So more engagement and trying to drive those messages across, if that's that's where we're also moving as a business.
Excellent. More questions? Usually one comes.
J'ajoute à cela justement à ce que vient de dire Noleen, c'est que le réassureur là, il joue un rôle vraiment crucial dans tout ce qui est promotion de bonnes pratiques et promotion d'acteurs responsables et durables. Je pense que pour nous, pour TunisRe, on a largement bataillé dans le secteur des assurances tunisiennes, bien sûr, à sensibiliser les différents acteurs, les différents assureurs à certaines problématiques liées au changement climatique, notamment la décarbonisation des assureurs tunisiens. Et on a organisé là-dessus un workshop en 2024 sur comment aider vers la transition bas carbone. Je pense que le réassureur il joue un rôle très important au niveau directement gestion de portefeuille, l'assistance technique, l'aide à la tarification pour les risques et tout, mais il joue un rôle de promoteur et d'incitateur à la mise en place de telles solutions et communiquer là-dessus avec tous les acteurs économiques.
As a reinsurer, they play a crucial role in promoting good practices and also supporting responsible actors. And this is some of the work that's been done by TunisRe in terms of supporting Tunisian insurers in transitioning to low carbon portfolios. And while the reinsurer's role is mainly around structuring and pricing, it is also the reinsurer's responsibility to ensure that responsible and sustainable practices are adopted in the structuring of solutions.
Wonderful. I think we might have space for one more question. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. Yeah, the lady in the back.
Thank you, and thank you for this great conversation. I'm Hedvig from together here with Verda Consulting. So we're doing consulting on the finance industry in Kenya specifically, trying to communicate the right perspective also back to Europe. So I think this is a very key topic we're talking about now, and you mentioned everything from Africa understands the local context and we need a perception change to the risk perception is a key part of the financing gap, and also how to show the investors what their returns come from. And I feel like all of this is data, right? So do you have any good examples of finding the right data to do this communication?
Data question. I think it's partly again with Noleen, but maybe also with Hassan and Chiyedza. So we're all answering this one as I come to the front because I think we need to wrap up now shortly. So do you want to start, Hassan?
Sure. Thank you, and it's a very good question, and this is something again we're looking into as academics. So on risk perception, there are two things I would want to say in terms of data. if you haven't come across Caroline Flemmer, she's an economist based in the US, in Columbia, and she's just written a paper on biodiversity finance where she looked into 33 biodiversity related deals that happened, and out of which she found that 16 of those deals were purely private, purely financed by private finance, and the rate of return was actually 14.7%, compared to the other 17 or whatever is left deals which were blended finance had a lower rate of return than 14.7%. It was, I think, around 12%. So the idea over here is that blended finance, even though it does not, it reduces risk, it does not create new revenue streams. And I think this is the key kind of crux of the paper. It's a 40-page paper, but this is what the key crux is out of it, that, you know, blended finance or when you have public finance blending into these financial instruments, it's not creating actual new revenue streams. It's just de-risking it for it to be above the investability criteria. One, and the second thing is on seeing risk as basically as a 3-layered or 2-layered cake. And if we are to perceive risk in terms of how nature-based solutions can come in and how investment can go into such projects, we need to kind of see whether there's a foundation already, whether, for example, if we are looking into a coffee grower in Africa, is the soil fertile when we talk about agroforestry, right? If not, there would be a different kind of risk perception there. If the nature is entirely degraded, you would need an entire foundation to be built. And for that, a private financier is not going to come in, and then you would need someone like a concessional finance provider to come in, take up that first loss of risk, and then you would see some more private finance coming in. So it's about how each project needs to be tailored in terms of how risk is perceived.
Wonderful. I think we could continue talking for hours. I'll give 30 seconds to Noleen and Chiyedza for wrapping up, and then I think my colleagues start chatting with. Sorry, we're out of time. So if you're interested to learn more from them, come to me or come to one of the panelists during the break. We're now continuing here in this session with another workshop, a workshop for insurers, and I see my wonderful colleague Diana in the back who is going to take you through that, but not without a little bit of applause for our wonderful panelists and for you, our audience, for being so active. Thank you.